John Harper was the kind of guy who preferred to stay under the radar. He wasn't flashy or loud, and he certainly didn't go looking for trouble. His life revolved around his work as a contractor, building homes and fixing things that needed repair. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and John took pride in what he did. One of the tools of his trade was a small private warehouse located on the edge of his suburban neighborhood. The warehouse wasn't much to look at, just a plain gray structure with a gravel driveway and some faded paint, but it meant everything to John. It was where he stored his tools, construction materials, and equipment. For years, it had been his sanctuary, a place where he could focus without distractions. But all of that changed one quiet Tuesday afternoon when John arrived at the warehouse to check on some inventory. As he pulled up in his truck, something felt off. At first, he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Then he noticed them. Cars. Lots of cars. Parked haphazardly around the perimeter of his property. They weren't delivery trucks or vehicles belonging to his workers. They were luxury sedans, shiny SUVs, and even a bright pink convertible that seemed out of place against the industrial backdrop. John frowned as he stepped out of his truck. "What's going on here?" he muttered to himself. He walked around the lot, counting the cars. There were at least 10 of them, all parked in spots they clearly shouldn't have been. Some were blocking access to the side entrance, while others were dangerously close to his storage containers. One car even had its hazard lights blinking, as if the driver thought this was a legitimate parking spot. At first, John assumed it was some kind of mix-up. Maybe someone had mistaken his warehouse for a public lot or thought it was part of the nearby community center. But as the days went by, more cars kept showing up. By the end of the week, the once empty lot surrounding his warehouse looked like a makeshift parking garage. And it wasn't just cars anymore. There were people too. Families unloading groceries, kids playing tag between the vehicles, and groups of adults lounging in folding chairs, sipping drinks from coolers. It was chaos. One evening, as John locked up the warehouse, he spotted a familiar face among the crowd. Karen Wilkins, the head of the local homeowners association, HOA, was standing near her pink convertible, chatting animatedly with another resident. John recognized her immediately, not because they were friends, but because Karen was hard to miss. She was the type of person who always seemed to be in charge, whether she was organizing block parties or enforcing strict HOA rules about lawn ornaments. John hesitated for a moment before walking over to confront her. "Excuse me," he said, trying to keep his tone polite. "Can I ask what's going on here? These are my private grounds, and I don't remember giving anyone permission to park here." Karen turned to him with a smug smile that made John's stomach sink. "Oh, John," she exclaimed, as if they were old pals. "I'm so glad you're finally joining us. We've been meaning to thank you for letting us use your space. You see, our usual parking lot is being renovated, and we needed somewhere to park temporarily. Don't worry, we'll take good care of it." John blinked, stunned. "Wait, hold on. I didn't agree to let anyone park here. This is private property." Karen waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "Oh, don't be silly. Your warehouse looks practically abandoned anyway. Really, we're doing you a favor by keeping it occupied. Think of it as free security." John opened his mouth to argue, but Karen cut him off before he could get a word in. "Look, John, everyone appreciates your generosity. Just trust me on this, okay? You won't regret it." With that, she turned back to her conversation, leaving John standing there, speechless and seething. As he drove home that night, John couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped into something much bigger and much more frustrating than he'd anticipated. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a battle he would soon wish he'd never started. The next morning, John woke up with a knot in his stomach. He replayed the conversation with Karen over and over in his head, trying to figure out how she could possibly think it was okay to take over his property without asking. It wasn't just about the cars. It was the principle of the thing. His warehouse was asterisk his asterisk. He paid taxes on it, maintained it, and used it for his livelihood. How could someone like Karen waltz in and treat it like her personal parking lot? Determined to put an end to this nonsense, John decided to visit the warehouse again. This time, he brought printed copies of his property deed and a few no trespassing signs he'd picked up from the hardware store. If Karen and her neighbors needed a clearer message, he was going to give it to them, in big bold letters. When he arrived, the scene was even worse than before. More cars had appeared overnight, cramming every available inch of space around the building. A group of teenagers was skateboarding near one of his storage containers, while a couple lounged on a picnic blanket in the shade of the warehouse wall. Someone had even set up a portable speaker, blasting music loud enough to rattle the windows. The peaceful workspace John once cherished now felt like a chaotic community fairground. John took a deep breath and got to work. He hammered the no trespassing signs into the ground at each corner of the property, making sure they were visible from every angle. Then he walked around, handing out copies of the property deed to anyone who would listen. Most people ignored him, brushing him off as if he were some cranky old man yelling at clouds. But when he approached Karen, who was sitting in her pink convertible scrolling through her phone, things got heated. "Karen," John said firmly, holding up the deed, "I need you to tell everyone to move their cars. Now, this is private property." Karen barely glanced up from her phone. "Oh, relax, John. We're not hurting anything. In fact, we're improving the place. Look how lively it is." "Improving," John repeated, incredulous. "You've turned my business property into a tailgate party. That's not improvement. That's trespassing." Karen finally looked up, her expression dripping with condescension. "Trespassing? Really, John? You act like this is Fort Knox or something. It's just an empty lot. And honestly, you should be grateful we're using it. Otherwise, it would just sit here collecting dust." John clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "This isn't an empty lot. It's my warehouse, my private property. I don't care what you think it looks like. Nobody gave you permission to park here, and I want all these cars gone by tomorrow." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "You're being ridiculous. Nobody's going to leave because of your little tantrum. Besides, the HOA has already approved this arrangement. So unless you want to deal with the entire neighborhood hating you, I suggest you drop it. The HOA doesn't own this land." "I do," John shot back. "And if you don't start taking me seriously, you'll regret it." Karen smirked, clearly unbothered. "Go ahead, John. Try something. See how far that gets you." With that, she went back to scrolling through her phone, effectively dismissing him. Fuming, John realized he wasn't dealing with rational people anymore. These weren't just careless neighbors. They were entitled individuals who believed the world owed them whatever they wanted. They saw his warehouse as nothing more than a blank canvas for their convenience, completely disregarding the fact that it belonged to someone else. As he drove away, John couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. He knew Karen wasn't bluffing. She had influence in the neighborhood, and rallying the HOA members against him wouldn't be hard for her. But backing down wasn't an option either. His father had always told him, "Stand your ground, even when it's hard." Those words echoed in his mind as he plotted his next move. For now, the battle lines were drawn. On one side was John, the quiet contractor fighting to protect what was rightfully his. On the other was Karen, the self-appointed ruler of the HOA, convinced she could steamroll over anyone who disagreed with her. What neither of them realized yet was that this clash of wills was only beginning, and soon the whole neighborhood would feel the ripple effects. Over the next few days, John's frustration reached a boiling point. Despite his clear warnings and posted signs, nothing changed at the warehouse. If anything, the situation worsened. The cars kept coming, more than ever before, and with them came a new wave of chaos. Residents began treating the space like their personal playground. Kids chased each other around the parking lot, kicking soccer balls dangerously close to John's tools and equipment. Someone even set up a makeshift grill near the side entrance, filling the air with the smell of burnt burgers and leaving grease stains on the asphalt. John tried reasoning with the offenders directly, approaching car owners as they returned from work or errands. "Excuse me," he'd say politely, "but this is private property. You can't park here." Most people reacted with indifference, shrugging him off as if he were speaking another language. A few laughed outright, telling him to lighten up. One man even had the audacity to pat John on the shoulder and say, "Hey, don't sweat it, buddy. We're just borrowing the space for a bit." It wasn't just the cars anymore. It was the disrespect. Empty soda cans, candy wrappers, and fast food bags littered the ground. Someone had scratched crude graffiti into the side of the warehouse wall, ruining the paint job John had painstakingly applied last summer. Even worse, one of his storage containers had been pried open, its contents scattered across the floor. Tools he relied on daily were missing, likely stolen by opportunistic visitors who saw his property as fair game. Desperate for help, John called the local police department. When the officers arrived, he explained the situation in detail, showing them the no trespassing signs and providing copies of his property deed. He hoped they would step in and enforce the law, dispersing the crowd and restoring order. But when Karen appeared on the scene, clipboard in hand and wearing her signature smug grin, everything shifted. "Officers, thank you for coming," Karen said sweetly, stepping forward as if she were hosting a neighborhood meeting. "I'm sure Mr. Harper has expressed his concerns, but let me clarify the situation. Our community pool parking lot is currently under renovation, and we've temporarily relocated overflow parking to this area. It's all been approved by the HOA board, and we're working closely with residents to ensure minimal disruption." The officers exchanged glances, clearly unsure of whom to believe. One of them turned to John and asked, "Did you give permission for this arrangement?" "No," John replied firmly. "Absolutely not. This is my private property. I didn't approve any of this." Karen interrupted, her tone dripping with Fox concern. "Well, that's true. He hasn't given formal permission. But honestly, officers, it's such a minor issue. The space was going unused, and we're simply making practical use of it. Surely there's no harm in that." The officers hesitated, caught between two conflicting narratives. Finally, one of them suggested mediation, urging both parties to come to an agreement. "Maybe you could find a compromise," he offered, though his words felt more like a dismissal than a solution. As the officers drove away, Karen shot John a triumphant look. "See, even the police agree this is a non-issue. Why don't you stop being so difficult and join us in making the best of this situation?" John clenched his jaw, realizing that appealing to authority wasn't going to solve his problem. Karen had played her cards perfectly, spinning the story to make herself look reasonable while painting him as unreasonable and uncooperative. The officers hadn't seen the garbage, the graffiti, or the stolen tools. They only saw a quiet man squaring off against a confident woman backed by the HOA. That night, as John sat alone in his living room, he replayed the events in his mind. He knew Karen wasn't bluffing about her influence. She thrived on drama and manipulation, and she wouldn't hesitate to turn the entire neighborhood against him if it meant getting her way. But giving in wasn't an option either. Every time he thought about backing down, he remembered the mess at the warehouse, the trash, the damage, the sheer disregard for his rights, and his resolve hardened. Then it hit him. Maybe he didn't need the police or the HOA to fix this. Maybe it was time to take matters into his own hands. After all, the law was on his side. If people refused to respect his property, he'd have to show them what happened when rules were ignored. As he opened his laptop and started researching towing companies, a small smile crept onto his face. Karen and her entitled friends had made a big mistake thinking they could walk all over him. And soon, they'd learn exactly how wrong they were. John spent the next few days diving deep into research, determined to find a solution that would finally put an end to the chaos at his warehouse. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was laser-focused. This wasn't about revenge or teaching Karen a lesson. It was about standing up for himself and reclaiming what was rightfully his. As he scoured legal websites and forums, he discovered something that gave him hope. Towing unauthorized vehicles from private property was completely within his rights, as long as proper notice was given. Armed with this knowledge, John contacted a local towing company known for handling similar situations. The owner, a no-nonsense man named Mike, listened intently as John explained the situation. "These people have ignored every warning," John said, frustration evident in his voice. "They think they can do whatever they want because they're part of some HOA clique. But I'm done playing nice." Mike nodded sympathetically. "Don't worry. We see cases like this all the time. We'll get your property cleared out, no problem. Just make sure you've posted official notices so there's no room for excuses." With Mike's guidance, John drafted formal warning signs that left zero ambiguity. Printed in bold, red letters, they read, *PRIVATE PER unauthorized. Vehicles will be towed at owner's expense after 72 hours. Asterisk beneath the text, he included details about the towing company, including their contact information and fees. Satisfied with the design, John ordered several copies and mounted them around the perimeter of the warehouse, making sure they were impossible to miss. But John didn't stop there. Knowing how crafty Karen could be, he wanted to cover all his bases. He sent certified letters to every member of the HOA board, including Karen herself, informing them of the impending action. Each letter contained a copy of the warning sign, along with a polite but firm explanation. "If your vehicle remains on my property after the 72-hour deadline, it will be towed. Please remove it immediately to avoid further inconvenience." Karen received her letter with a sneer, tearing it open and scanning the contents before crumpling it into a ball. "Typical," she muttered under her breath, tossing it into the trash. She called a few of her closest HOA allies, laughing off John's threats as empty posturing. "He wouldn't dare," she insisted, her confidence unwavering. "He's bluffing. Trust me, he doesn't have the guts." Unfortunately for Karen, her arrogance blinded her to the reality of the situation. Most of the other residents reacted similarly, dismissing the warnings as overblown theatrics. Some assumed John was trying to scare them into leaving voluntarily, while others simply forgot about the letters altogether. No one took the threats seriously, not even when John installed additional security cameras around the warehouse to document the violations. As the 72-hour countdown ticked away, John felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. He knew the next step would escalate things dramatically, but he also knew it was necessary. For too long, Karen and her neighbors had treated his property like their personal dumping ground, disregarding his rights and trampling over his boundaries. Now, they were about to face the consequences of their actions. On the final day of the deadline, John arrived at the warehouse early in the morning, parking his truck out of sight. From a distance, he watched as the tow trucks rolled in, their presence instantly drawing attention from a handful of residents milling around the lot. At first, there was confusion, then disbelief, as drivers began hooking up cars and hauling them away. One by one, the vehicles disappeared, including Karen's beloved pink convertible, which barely fit onto the flab due to its oversized spoiler. By noon, the once crowded lot was eerily empty, save for John's truck and the towering storage containers. The transformation was striking, a stark reminder of how quickly entitlement could vanish when met with unwavering resolve. As John locked the gate behind the last tow truck, he allowed himself a small smile. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of control returning to his life. Little did he know, the real fireworks were still to come. The moment the tow trucks pulled away, Leaving the warehouse lot eerily empty, the neighborhood erupted into chaos. Word spread faster than wildfire, fueled by outraged phone calls, frantic text messages, and angry posts in the HOA's private online group. Residents who had parked their cars at John's warehouse arrived one by one, only to find their prized vehicles missing. Some stood staring at the empty spaces in disbelief, while others stormed up to John's property line, demanding answers. Karen was among the first to arrive, her face red with fury as she marched toward John, who was calmly securing the newly installed chain-link gate. "What did you do with my car?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the quiet afternoon like a siren. "You can't just take people's property." John turned to face her, his expression calm but firm. "Your car wasn't taken, it was towed. There were clear warnings posted all over the property, and you received a certified letter explaining everything. If you want your vehicle back, you'll need to contact the towing company." Karen gaped at him, momentarily speechless. Then, regaining her composure, she jabbed a finger in his direction. "This is harassment. You're targeting us because you have some kind of vendetta against the HOA. I'm calling the police right now." "Go ahead," John replied coolly. "They already know about this. Everything was done by the book." His confidence only seemed to infuriate Karen further. She whipped out her phone and began dialing, pacing back and forth as she waited for someone to answer. Meanwhile, other residents started gathering around, their voices rising in a cacophony of complaints. A man in a suit shouted about how inconvenient it was to retrieve his car from the impound lot, while a woman holding a toddler complained that she couldn't afford the towing fees. Someone even accused John of sabotaging the community pool parking renovation project just to create problems. John ignored the noise, focusing instead on reinforcing the security measures he put in place. He double-checked the locks on the gate, ensuring they were secure, then stepped back to admire his handiwork. For the first time in weeks, his warehouse looked peaceful, untouched by the mess and mayhem that had plagued it for so long. It was a small victory, but one he intended to protect at all costs. As the crowd grew louder, Karen finally finished her call with the police and turned to address the group. "Everyone, listen up," she barked, silencing the murmurs with her commanding tone. "John thinks he's above the law, but we won't let him get away with this. The officers are on their way, and we're going to make sure justice is served." Her dramatic declaration earned nods of approval from some of the residents, but not everyone was convinced. A few people exchanged uneasy glances, whispering about whether they should have listened to John's warnings. One older man muttered under his breath, "Maybe we shouldn't have parked there in the first place." The arrival of the police officers brought a tense hush over the crowd. This time, however, the outcome was different. When Karen launched into her rehearsed tirade about how John was being unreasonable and vindictive, the officers cut her off mid-sentence. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the documentation," one of them said firmly. Mr. Harper followed proper protocol. He posted clear notices, gave ample warning, and acted within his rights as a property owner. The vehicles were towed legally. Karen's jaw dropped, her perfectly composed facade cracking for the first time. But this is outrageous," she stammered. "He's ruining our neighborhood." The officer shook his head. "If you have concerns about where to park during the renovation, I suggest taking it up with the HOA or finding an alternative solution. But trespassing on private property isn't acceptable, no matter the circumstances." Defeated, Karen slunk back into the crowd, her usual bravado replaced by simmering resentment. Around her, the mood shifted as reality sank in. People began muttering apologies to John, some sheepishly admitting they should have respected his boundaries. Others grumbled about the towing fees, but ultimately accepted responsibility for ignoring the warnings. By the time the officers left, the crowd had dispersed, leaving John alone once again. As he surveyed the now empty lot, he felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. He hadn't set out to make enemies or cause trouble, but he'd also refused to let anyone trample over his rights. The message was clear. Entitlement had consequences, And those consequences came with a price tag attached, literally. For Karen and her fellow HOA members, the lesson was harsh but necessary. And for John, it was proof that standing up for yourself, even when it felt impossible, could lead to justice after all. In the days that followed, the neighborhood buzzed with tension. The towing incident had shaken things up in ways no one could have predicted. For Karen and her loyal HOA followers, it was a bitter pill to swallow. Many of them were still fuming over the towing fees, which turned out to be far higher than they'd anticipated. Some residents even skipped their morning coffee runs just to scrape together enough cash to retrieve their vehicles from the impound lot. The pink convertible that Karen prided herself on became a sore subject. She refused to talk about it, except to mutter darkly about that vindictive man whenever someone brought it up. But not everyone shared Karen's outrage. As the dust settled, cracks began to form within the HOA ranks. A few members started questioning why Karen hadn't sought John's permission before commandeering his property. "We should have asked him first," said Greg, a soft-spoken accountant who rarely spoke out during meetings. "It's his land, after all. We can't just take what isn't ours." Karen shot him a glare so sharp it could cut glass. "Oh, please, Greg. Don't act like you're some moral crusader now. You parked there too, didn't you?" Greg shifted uncomfortably but stood his ground. "Yeah, I did. And I was wrong. Maybe if we'd handled this differently, none of this would have happened." The exchange sparked a heated debate at the next HOA meeting. What was supposed to be a routine discussion about holiday decorations quickly devolved into an argument over John's warehouse. Some members sided with Karen, accusing John of being unreasonable and unneighborly. Others defended him, pointing out that private property rights were sacred and shouldn't be ignored, even for something as trivial as parking. The room grew louder and more chaotic as tempers flared, until finally, the HOA president slammed his gavel down and called for order. Outside the meeting hall, whispers spread among neighbors who weren't directly involved in the drama. While some sympathized with Karen, viewing John's actions as extreme, many quietly admired his determination to stand up for himself. One elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson went so far as to bake John a pie and leave it on his doorstep with a note that read, "Thank you for reminding us all to respect each other's boundaries." For John, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible under the circumstances. He spent the following week reinforcing the security around his warehouse, installing motion-activated floodlights and cameras to deter any future trespassers. He also hired a local handyman to repair the damage caused by the unauthorized visitors, repainting the graffiti-covered wall, fixing the broken storage container lock, and cleaning up the litter that had accumulated during the chaos. Despite the lingering animosity, John couldn't help but reflect on the silver linings of the ordeal. The whole experience had taught him valuable lessons about assertiveness and self-respect. Before this incident, he might have hesitated to confront someone like Karen, fearing backlash or conflict. But now he realized that standing your ground didn't make you difficult, it made you strong. The situation also forced the neighborhood to confront uncomfortable truths about entitlement and accountability. Conversations that had once revolved around trivial matters like mailbox colors or lawn ornaments shifted toward deeper topics, respecting personal property, resolving disputes peacefully, and fostering a sense of community without infringing on individual rights. Even those who initially resented John admitted, albeit grudgingly, that his actions had sparked important discussions. As for Karen, her reputation took a hit she hadn't anticipated. Once seen as the queen bee of the neighborhood, she now faced criticism from both sides. Some accused her of dragging them into a mess they never wanted to be part of, while others mocked her inability to handle the fallout gracefully. Her attempts to rally support against John fell flat, leaving her increasingly isolated. By the end of the month, she resigned as head of the HOA board, citing personal reasons. Though the tension eventually subsided, the memory of the incident lingered, a cautionary tale etched into the fabric of the community. For John, it served as proof that doing the right thing, even when it was hard, was always worth it. And for the rest of the neighborhood, it was a reminder that entitlement came with consequences. And sometimes, those consequences arrived on the back of a tow truck. Months passed, and the neighborhood slowly began to heal from the turmoil that had erupted over John's warehouse. The chaos of the towing incident faded into memory, but its impact lingered in subtle ways. For one, the HOA meetings became noticeably quieter. Gone were the days of Karen's dramatic monologues and grand proclamations. Her resignation had left a leadership vacuum, forcing the remaining members to adopt a more collaborative approach. The new board president, Greg, made it a priority to foster open communication and mutual respect among residents. He even introduced a rule requiring written permission before using any private property for community purposes. John noticed the change too. People who once breezed past him with barely a nod now greeted him with polite smiles, or at least avoided glaring daggers. Some neighbors even went out of their way to thank him for bringing attention to the importance of respecting boundaries. One evening, as he was locking up the warehouse after a long day of work, a young couple approached him hesitantly. "We just wanted to say we're sorry about what happened," the woman said softly. "It must have been frustrating for you." John nodded, appreciating the gesture. "It was tough, but I think everyone learned something valuable from it." The couple agreed, adding, "We'll make sure our kids understand how important it is to respect other people's space." Moments like these reminded John that not all conflicts ended in bitterness. Sometimes, they could lead to growth, if people were willing to listen. As for Karen, she kept a low profile after stepping down from the HOA board. Her pink convertible reappeared on the streets occasionally, though it rarely ventured near John's warehouse. Rumor had it that she'd moved her focus to organizing charity events outside the neighborhood, perhaps hoping to rebuild her tarnished reputation. Whether she truly learned anything from the experience was anyone's guess, but her absence from local politics brought a sense of calm that many residents appreciated. For John, life returned to its steady rhythm. His warehouse, once a battleground, was now a sanctuary again, a place where he could focus on his work without distractions. He continued reinforcing its security, installing a keypad entry system, and hiring a part-time guard during peak hours to deter any potential troublemakers. These measures weren't cheap, but they gave him peace of mind, knowing his property was protected. One Saturday morning, as John sipped coffee on his porch, he spotted Mrs. Peterson walking her dog down the street. She waved cheerfully and called out, "Morning, John. Still enjoying your quiet little corner of the world?" He chuckled, raising his mug in response. "More than ever, Mrs. Peterson. More than ever." Though the ordeal had tested his patience and resolve, it also strengthened his belief in standing up for what was right. He often thought about how easy it would have been to give in, to let Karen and her followers use his property without complaint. But deep down, he knew that doing so would have chipped away at his dignity and set a dangerous precedent. By taking a stand, he hadn't just reclaimed his warehouse, he'd reaffirmed his values. The neighborhood itself seemed different too. Conversations at the community center revolved less around petty grievances and more around finding solutions to shared challenges. When the pool parking lot renovation wrapped up, the HOA held a small celebration to mark the occasion. To everyone's surprise, John attended, and while he didn't stay long, his presence was noted and appreciated. Looking back, John realized the entire episode had been a turning point, not just for him, but for the community as a whole. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about understanding the importance of respect, accountability, and compromise. And as he drove away from the celebration that evening, the sun setting behind him, he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had stood his ground when it mattered most, and in doing so, he'd helped shape a better future for himself, his warehouse, and the neighborhood he called home.